If you want to sell your plugins or just have other people use them, it is a good idea to make them integrate as easy as possible with other plugins. One popular way to do this is with the Placeholder API. Placeholder API is a very famous plugin with almost 2 million downloads, and it allows you to use certain information that other plugins provide about themselves inside your own plugin. Each of those information is saved in something called a placeholder. So let's say you have an economy plugin with placeholder support. This plugin may provide placeholders to get the player's balance and the player name with the most money on the server, for example. And a duels plugin with placeholder support can use placeholders, for example, to show the wins and losses of a player. In this video you will learn how you can use placeholders of other plugins and how to create your own placeholders and let other plugins use them. But before you can actually make use of the Placeholder API, you first have to import it into your project. So go on the Spigot page, click on the wiki link, and inside the dev guides click on using Placeholder API. Since we're using Maven as our package manager, select the Maven option and first copy the repository tag, and inside the pom.xml in your project, paste it inside the repositories tag. If you don't know how to create this project setup, you can watch the second episode of this series. And now go back to the documentation and copy the dependency and paste it inside your pom.xml. Now click the Maven icon and reload. And in the plugin YML you need to mark the Placeholder API as a dependency, and you do this with soft depend and then in brackets the name of the plugin, which in this case is Placeholder API. And now inside your main class create the onEnable method, and inside here we're going to check if the Placeholder API is on the server. So if bucket.getPluginManager.isPluginEnabled, and then here you have to write the name of the plugin. In this case, it's Placeholder API. So first we're going to check if the plugin is not on the server. In this case, we're going to send a message. Bucket.getConsoleSender, rich message, in red color, Placeholder API, plugin is needed. And then we're going to disable this plugin. Bucket.getPluginManager.disable plugin this, and return. And now if you start the server, you can see that you get the error message because the Placeholder API plugin is not installed at the moment. So go back into the browser, to the Spigot link and download it. Then go into the downloads folder and install the plugin. Then reload. And now you can see that the error message is gone and that the Placeholder API has been loaded. We are here if Placeholder API plugin is not on the server, and we are here if Placeholder API is on the server. And now let's say for testing purposes we want to output some placeholders when a player joins. So first we need to register a listener for that. Get server, get plugin manager, register events. The listener will be new testing listener, and the plugin is this. Now let's create the listener in a listeners package, and the name was testing listener. Implements listener, and now create a join listener. Public void on join, player join event, and let's get the player. And now to pass placeholders, you need to do placeholder API set placeholders, and the most common thing you probably want is this method, which in the first parameter takes a player. This is the player the placeholder should be applied on. So if you, for example, use an economy placeholder of an economy plugin to get the balance, this needs to be the player that you want to get the balance of. And the second parameter is the text that contains the placeholders. Let's just say the variable is called text, and now we have to create it. String text is equal to player is OP, because we're going to use placeholder that shows yes if the player has operator permissions and no otherwise. And now let's find a placeholder like this, and for that you can go to the Placeholder API documentation on user guides and placeholder list. This is a player related placeholder, so go to P and player. First, before you can use any of these placeholders, you need to install them. So make sure the Placeholder API plugin is installed on your server and execute this command. And as you can see, there are many placeholders. Those are only the ones regarding players. For example, you can get the current XP the player has, the player name as it shows in the tab list, the player health. But for this example, we're going to use a placeholder that is called player_is OP, which is this one here. So copy and go back into your project. Now to use the placeholder, it is very easy. You just paste it into the string where you want the data to show, and then you assign the variable to the return value of the set placeholders method. And the way this works now is when a player joins the server, we get that player, save it inside a variable, then we create a text variable which contains a placeholder that shows if the player has operator permissions or not. And in the next step we are going to parse the placeholders in this text and apply the placeholders value to the player that just joined the server. And in the next step we're going to send the message to the player. So player send rich message, let's say in blue for example, and append the text. Now let's join the server and you can see that it worked. This account has operator permissions and because of this the placeholder has been resolved to yes. So let's remove those permissions and try again. And as you can see, it says no because this account does not have operator permissions anymore. If this does not work for you and you just see the placeholder written out in chat, make sure that you actually reassign the variable and that you actually installed the expansion for this placeholder. So in the case of this player placeholder, make sure that you executed this command from the placeholder API documentation. And now that you know how to read placeholders of other plugins, I'm going to teach you how you can create your own placeholders so other plugins can use them. So first let's create a package where we can put our placeholders and call the package something like placeholders. And the idea was for this example to create placeholders that show the current date and the current time. So I'm going to call the class dateTimePlaceholder. Every placeholder class that we create has to extend placeholder expansion and implement some methods. When you go back to the documentation, you see that placeholders look like this. They start with a percentage sign, then have a group they belong to, in this case player group. This group is called the identifier, and then after that is the name of the actual placeholder. My idea was to create placeholders that start with date time, and then the first placeholder is going to be called date, that shows today's date, and then the second placeholder is date time and time, that shows the current time. And now to set the identifier of our placeholders, in this case date time, we need to change the return value of the getIdentifier method. So in this case it's going to return date time. Then the getAuthors method should return the people that have worked on this code. You can either hardcode something in here or you can use the values from the config.yml file. And to do that you first have to create a constructor that takes the main class of your plugin and assigns it to a local variable. So Java plugin, and then with Control N you can create a constructor and choose the field that you want to have. In this case only plugin. And now you can replace the hard-coded value with plugin.get. Plugin meta.getAuthors. And as you can see, the return value of this is a list with multiple strings, and each entry of the list is one author because you can have multiple authors in the plugin.yml file. So now we need to convert that to a single string, and we do that with string.join, then comma, empty, and place the method here. And this now places a comma with an empty space after every name of the author, so we get a nice looking list of authors. And you can do the same for the version, just get it from the plugin description file, so plugin get plugin meta.get version. And now to add some logic to the placeholder, you need to override a method called onRequest. This method will be called every time your placeholder is used somewhere in a string. The offline player is the player that the placeholder should be applied on, and the params will be the name of the placeholder. So in our case it will be either date or time. So let's first check for the date placeholder. So if params.equals ignore case date, and we are here if placeholder is date time underscore date. And now we need to get the date. You can do that with final date equals to new date. And then you simply need to return the value with which the placeholder should be replaced with. In this case, return date dot to a string, for example. And now let's check for the second placeholder. If params.equals ignore case time, then we are here if placeholder is date time underscore time. And now to get the current time, you do final local time is equal to local time dot now, and then you simply return time dot to string. And now for the last case, you are here if placeholder is date time and then something else, and for that case we want to return nothing. And now the last thing you need to do is to register your placeholder expansion, and you do that with new date time placeholder. Then you need to pass the argument and register. And now let's use the placeholder somewhere. Date, time, date, and date, time, time. And now when you join the server, you can see that it works. We have the date here, and after the comma, the time. And you can format it, of course, as you wish. So you can just show the day and month, and for the time you could remove the seconds, for example.